Okay, in this video, I'm just going to talk about some of my understandings when it comes to time. If anyone has seen my videos before, you know that I try to explain my concepts to you guys, and it's very difficult for me sometimes to put into words because I have a lot of understanding and knowing about these things, but when I go to actually share them, it doesn't make sense to people. So hopefully this is helpful. Just keep watching. Okay, so first off, ignore all my random writing on this page. Half of this was me just trying to figure out stuff. But what I want to explain in this video is that first off, we are constantly expanding and contracting things. So there's been some articles on this before, but when you're observing reality, you're looking at it as a solid when you're observing it, but as soon as you stop observing something, it collapses back into a wave once again. So it's basically like a video game when you're looking at things on the screen, and then as you leave that part of the video game, it's like they sort of collapse behind you. What's important to understand about this is that thoughts themselves are a contraction. Thoughts are pulling energy inwards into a very small space. You're essentially taking reality and shrinking it down really, really small. Same with when you observe something in the mind, think of it like you looking at that thing under a little microscope. And then expansion is the process when you actually stop observing that thought in your mind, which is reflection. So we have absorption and reflection. So basically you're kind of like the moon. You absorb light and then you also reflect light. And again, what reflection is essentially that thought then expanding outwards. For example, if you have a thought, you are basically looking at a particle, and then as soon as you stop observing that thought, you let go of it and it collapses back into a wave, which can be seen as kind of like a droplet of water falling on a pond of water. And then so now that little tiny droplet of water then goes and starts to expand and ripples outward. Like you see the ripples getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is that thought essentially expanding in your outer experience. And as it's doing that, what's happening to the thought is that it's slowing down in its speed. It's going to slow down so that it can eventually become visible to you, because solids are essentially slow-moving particles, and they're also slow-moving particles in a small space, like they're closely spaced together. So essentially, to create a solid in your experience, you have to basically have energy that is vibrating at a slow rate, but you also have to have it moving in a very small enclosed space. Okay, so I tried to draw it out here, but think of your mind as working in binary code. So you have 1, 0, 1, which is the whole process of the mind, basically. So you have past, which is the 1, present, which is the circle right here, or the opening, portal, you could say, and then you also have another one right here. And so this is a thought, and then this would be like empty space right here, and then this is another thought. So you can think of this right here as you observing whatever it is you want to observe. And then right here is what happens when you stop observing what it is that you're observing. So you let go of it. What happens when you let go of it is that it turns back into a wave once again. But this time when it turns back into a wave, you also had a little particle that you created. So what happens is that little particle, you can think of it like a droplet of water falling on a lake, and then it starts to expand outwards. And essentially, what you're trying to do is trap this particle in the smallest space possible, because then if you do that, what happens is that you form a solid more easily. And this is why. This is probably a really terrible drawing of the structure of a solid, but you kind of get the idea. So you're creating this right here. You're creating one of them. That's all you're doing, creating one. And what happens with your mind, as soon as you stop then observing something, you let go of it. Now what happens is that this process will occur, and this little thing that you created right here, this little box that you created, will now start to repeat over and over again. Your mind duplicates whatever it is that you let go of. It just will keep duplicating, and get bigger and bigger. And so if you have a bunch of these all put together, what happens is that you start to form a solid shape. And so back to my point about you want to basically collapse this particle in the smallest space possible. And that's because what happens if you essentially observe whatever it is you want to observe in your experience, like say, again, this is just an object, something you're observing in your mind. And then what you do is that you get distracted in your reality, and you start to pay attention to a bunch of different things. You're distracted by all the stuff around you. You know, your mind's not really present when you're observing this thing. Like, you just sort of observe it, but you're very distracted. Then what happens is now you create sort of this like big gap between you and the other end of this thing. So the more present that you are, the faster that something can become solid, because you start to okay, you start to close this gap. This is horrible, but you start to close this gap between these two lines, the more present that you are. This is the best way I can describe it right here. So look at this spot right here, okay? So this is like a point of singularity. Think of it kind of like a black hole shape. If you are right here, this is you in the present moment on this end. And when you're in the present moment on this end, you can see all of this stuff in front of you. And why you can see this is because your energetic field is expanded as big as it can get when you're in this present moment. So the longer you spend in the present moment, the bigger your energetic field starts to get. So if you're going to manifest something, you want to spend some time in the present moment first, and then think of your thing and continue to be in the present moment after you've thought of it as well, which to be in the present moment is really just to flow along with reality. So right now I have like a heater going in the background. If I just listen to that heater, that's me being in the present moment and moving forward in time. Anything where you can observe a sense of motion, that is you moving through time. So you could watch a movie and follow along with the words that people are saying. It's just being present and paying attention to whatever it is that's right in front of you. And as you do this, as you're present, again, your magnetic field will just keep growing bigger and bigger. And why this is important is because essentially you've taken, again, this one little box, this one little time that you've done this, and you're just repeating it over and over at all levels. So like you're taking this one time that you've done it, and now you're doing it this level, you're doing it this level, this level, this level. Your mind naturally duplicates things when you're not thinking a bunch of other thoughts. So like if you're not inputting a bunch of new thoughts and you're not really distracted all the time, you'll just keep duplicating the same thing over and over, and eventually it will get big enough and slow enough that it will become a solid and it will become visible in your reality. Because this is really just, every time you have a thought, like it's just a really sped up version of reality. A thought is just like a rolled up version of reality. Like it's like a scroll, and then you're unraveling the scroll so that you can see it. Like it becomes big enough you can actually see it. So that's really all that you're doing. And one thing I also want to explain here is that if you've had desires in the past, like thoughts you've had, just random things you thought of that you like, those things are never forgotten. They basically are in this sort of like vortex. I know there's another teacher that talks about this. I cannot think of her name right now. Esther, maybe? Anyways, they're never forgotten. They just somehow get like lost somewhere along here where they didn't end up expanding far enough or big enough. But what's really cool about being in the present moment is that even those seeds of things that you planted in the past can then start to also expand as well in the present moment, because this can be done, like multiple things can expand simultaneously at the same time. So it doesn't have to be that you just have like one thing expanding. If you're in the present moment, all your previous desires are also expanding too at the same time at different rates. Also, I want to know, in the Bible, Jesus says that quote about the fact that all you need is faith the size of a mustard seed. And this is why, because the best way to manifest something in the fastest way possible is to be essentially in the present moment. Because what's cool about the present moment is that normally when you go to manifest something, people always say you got to like feel it real, you have to feel the emotion of it. But in the present moment, down here, you don't need nearly as much energy to make it happen. And why this is because you're manifesting something in a smaller space. Because vibration and like resonance, basically, as something expands, is based on how fast it can like hit against these sides right here. Like how fast it can bounce off of these sides back and forth. This is what creates like that vibration that people talk about. And people always say you need a high vibration, and this is because you're trying to get from this end to this end. So you need enough energy to get you from here all the way to the large end over here. But in the present moment, what's really cool once again about it is that you don't need so much energy to start the ball rolling. You only need a teeny bit of energy because you're in a really tiny space. Versus if your mind's distracted more often and your energetic field is smaller most of the time, you might be somewhere out here. And I'm talking about like your starting point is somewhere out here. Like this is where you are. You're not down here, you're right here. And so now when you try to manifest something, it's got to bounce from here to here. So you need more energy to get it to expand fully. Versus, once again, if you're back here, you don't need as much energy. You only need a little bit, because if you're in a small space and you're bouncing a ball off a wall, it's going to bounce back and forth really fast because it doesn't have anywhere else to go. Okay, in this video, I'm just going to